Back when we moved into our house, we were introduced to all of our neighbours by them coming to our house with cookies or brownies, just like they do in the movies. This was a nice, quiet, middle-class neighbourhood, made up of mostly older white people and new families. I mention that because we were the only black family in the neighbourhood. No black wives, husbands, not even adopted children. We didn't find it strange though. It was just very clear that we were different. I was about 13 at the time, and my brother was 15. Our backyard is a half an acre and is fenced, but it's connected to 2 other houses' backyards. Each one is half the size of ours, but we all have separating fences. So picture it, there's a T-shaped fence separating our backyards. An older man named Tom. He reminded me of Willie Nelson without the cool pigtails, and he liked to be outside, shirtless, and usually with a denim vest, no matter the weather. He was a well-built man, but visibly kind of frail. We actually found him funny, in a creepy old guy type of way. As I got older, he started to make comments. I played in the backyard with my 2 dogs a lot, and Tom could see me from his living room window that faced his backyard. Whenever I glanced over, I would see him in the window just standing there, watching me. When he noticed that I'd seen him, he'd come out and talk to me. I tried to get away before he could come out, but sometimes I was too slow. I didn't want to make it too obvious though, so I would just walk. But if I didn't make it inside, he'd yell for me to come back. I never got too close to the fence. I'd speak from a distance. He'd ask me about school, what grade I was in, tell me I was pretty, ask if I was old enough to have a boyfriend, and if I had an older sister or older friends that looked like me. I'd laugh it off, but after a few questions he'd stop talking and just stare at me silently. I'd always give an excuse about needing to go inside, then he'd nod and stand at the fence and watch me walk back into the house. This happened almost weekly. Now my mum loves to decorate, so she changes the house decor every few months. It's pretty annoying actually. In one of her designing sprees, she decided to get a new sliding glass door for the back porch, which required her to take the curtains down in the living room. It took forever to get them installed, but she figured there was no point in putting the curtains back up if we'd have to take them down again. Fine. Our family TV was in the living room, and I didn't have a TV in my room, so I'd often watch TV late into the night in the living room with my brother. One night my brother went to bed early, so I decided to watch TV by myself. Around midnight or so, I turned it off to go to bed, got up from the couch, turned off the light and turned around, only to see another light on, but not in my house. It was coming from Tom's house, in his living room, and there he was, standing in the window, watching me. I told my parents about it later, and they shrugged it off. I'm an anxious soul, so I often chalk things up to my anxiety. Fine. Soon after all this, my dogs started getting sick. I'd take them out to play and they'd start throwing up or having diarrhea. We knew it wasn't their food because we hadn't given them anything new. We threw away the dog treats we'd recently bought, just in case that was the problem, but it didn't stop. I noticed though that every time I let them out alone, they'd run straight over to Tom's fence and start jumping up and down and wagging their tails. He'd slowly walk outside, reach over the fence and feed them his treats, which was odd, because Tom didn't even have a dog. I told my parents and my dad went to talk to him, telling him the dogs were getting sick. He apologized, stopped feeding them, and they got better. A few weeks later, I was coming home from high school. My brother was in the grade above me, and I was a senior, so he was in college at the time. When I got home, no one else would be home for a few more hours. I had a routine. I'd put my book bag upstairs, change clothes, let the dogs out of their cages on the porch, get a snack, and then let them back in. For some reason though, I was unusually excited to see my dogs that day, so instead of going upstairs, I went straight to the back porch. I got to the door to open it, and I saw Tom, sitting on the ground in front of my dog's cages. I froze. Thankfully he hadn't seen me, So I looked over to see if the door was locked. It wasn't. I locked it as slowly as possible so it didn't make a noise, but it did. He looked over and saw me standing there. I ran upstairs and called my parents. My mum's a nurse, so she didn't have her phone on. And my dad just never answered the phone. I didn't think it was serious enough to call the police, so I just hid. After a moment, I heard him knock on the door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, though. It was almost friendly, like he just wanted to talk. I tried my dad's phone again and he answered. I was crying and telling him Tom was on the porch. He said he'd head home, but he was over an hour away. I just sat in my room waiting for my dad. The knocking eventually stopped, and when my dad arrived home, Tom was gone. Now, I don't know what happened between Tom and my dad, but he stopped coming outside and talking to me. He never stopped watching me, though, always standing in his living room. Sometimes I'd see him through the window and he'd just wave at me, but always with the light on, just so I knew he was still there. This happened 2 years ago, my sophomore year at university. I'm a 22-year-old female, and this was my very first apartment. I was so excited to be in it. During my freshman year, I had lived in a dorm on campus, and before that I just lived with my mum, so I had never lived on my own before. I shared the apartment with my friend Josh, who I had known since we were 13. I had just turned 20 when all this happened. And Josh was my absolute best friend, and it was his first year at the university, so naturally I wanted to show him around everywhere. And we pretty much did everything together. Now fast forward to the homecoming football game. We attend a university that's crazy into football, and we're actually a pretty good team, so the homecoming game is a big deal to everyone. Josh was so excited to go out, because it was his first homecoming game. He was going to go with this boy he'd started flirting with, and he wanted me to come along. I didn't really want to go, but I don't remember why. I just didn't. Josh got mad at me because of this, so we ended up saying a load of dumb stuff to each other and he left, so I was alone for the rest of the night. I had, and still do, have a small dog, Poppy, who lived with us. She was around a year old at the time. We actually had a pretty relaxing night in the beginning. I took a shower and put on face masks, and Poppy and I watched TV in bed. I remember listening to a song on repeat the entire day, because that's what I do when I find a new song that I like. To this day, I still can't listen to it without being reminded of this night. We went to sleep around 10 p.m, I think. I wasn't keeping up with what was going on with the football game, so I really have no idea if it was just ending or whatever, but I knew not to expect Josh home early because he was going out with the guy he was seeing, Dylan, afterwards. There is a strip of bars along one of the main roads running towards campus, and that's where they would be. That's where everyone would be after the game ended. I don't know what time it was, but I woke to cabinets being slammed and really loud noises. It was really dark in my room, and the only thing I could see was that the kitchen lights were on. I could see the light coming through the bottom of the door. It sounded like people were going through our kitchen cabinets one by one. Poppy was at the edge of the bed, barking like crazy. I had never seen her act this way. I was struggling to keep myself awake, because I'm a really heavy sleeper, although not anymore, and I just knew it wasn't Josh and Dylan. But some stupid part of me decided to call out, "Hello." And I really don't know if whoever it was heard me or not. Suddenly, my bedroom door opened and I shot up. Poppy was snarling and trying to lunge at the stranger in my bedroom. I couldn't see anything because of the light from the open door was kind of blinding. I could just see his figure. He was wearing a hoodie and he stood there for maybe 15 seconds as I was just staring at him. The whole time Poppy was trying to rip him apart. He quickly closed my door and I don't know why, but I just couldn't move. I wanted to move. Please move, I was saying to myself. Then my door flings open a second time, and we're staring face to face again, and for the same painfully long amount of time too. My heart was racing, and I remember thinking, he's going to hurt me. But now that I look back, I should have screamed or something. Poppy was at the very edge of the bed now, vicious and snarling. She sounded like a big dog, honestly. And then he slammed my door shut. As soon as he did, I jumped out of bed and locked my door. I heard this person take my car keys, so I was terrified they would find my car and steal it, since I had just parked directly outside. I frantically called 911 and was sobbing the whole time. I said, "Someone is in my house. They came in my room. Please help." It took them 30 minutes to get there, as I know that there were cop cars everywhere surrounding the bars, since it was homecoming, which I live a 5-minute drive from. When I finally came out, the living room and my roommate's bedroom were completely ransacked. My roommate's TV was on the floor because they'd tried to carry it out, but I guess decided to just leave it. They stole my Xboxes and all my games. They stole my book bag of all things with my textbooks and homework in it. The 2 policemen got here, and I told them everything and asked if I could call my roommate. Josh picked up the phone but was heavily slurring, and I could tell that he was inside of a bar and could barely hear me. I just screamed, "Please give Dylan the phone," hoping that Dylan was at least more sober than Josh was. So Josh put Dylan on the phone, and I don't know how, through my tears and sobs and through the screaming people and house music, he managed to hear me say that our apartment was robbed. He frantically said, "We're coming," and hung up. They probably ran. While I was waiting for them, one of the policemen asked if he could try to take prints from my roommate's TV, and I agreed. He then proceeded to then drop his flashlight directly on the screen, and as it shattered, he just looked at me, and I'm like, "Really?" Josh and Dylan arrive, and the policemen totally change their tone. They get aggressive and say that we were targeted for a reason. I'm pretty sure that since it was homecoming, the robbers were not expecting me to be there, and were trying to just rob apartments blindly. We also lived on the ground floor, so it's easier to get in comparison to the 2-story and 3-story apartments. Josh is in the military, but Josh looks just like any other regular college freshman boy, and his only friends at the time were literally me and Dylan, so we were the only ones who knew he was in the military. They tried to accuse Josh of stashing guns and drugs everywhere, and that's why we got robbed. I couldn't believe it. They then tried to pull me to the side and said that Josh hired people to come rob his own apartment while I was inside. They asked me how I knew these guys, and I said, "Sir, I have known Josh since we were 13. We moved here together to attend university." He just gave me a look. And when they left, we got our locks immediately changed, and then I had to take the next day off school to drive to the nearest Nissan dealership, which was 30 minutes away, and then wait 7 hours for them to rewire a key fob for me. To the men who robbed me, let's not meet again for your sake, because I'm older and angry and have defensive weapons now and won't be afraid to kick your ass. And to the cops who accused my roommate of robbing his own apartment, I hope you got fired, because yes, I did report you both. This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night, and I'm astounded I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm at my friend's apartment, who lives in a really rough part of town. In a series of poor decisions, that night I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know. Although safe to say, after a solid night of partying, around 4 a.m. I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decided that instead of staying the night at my friend's apartment, like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own. My friend's apartment had 2 separate exits to the building. One in the back, unlit parking lot of the building, and one facing the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the street, and the door in the front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realised I looked like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a small, petite female in my early 20s, and at the time I could hardly stand upright. I was using a street lamp to prop myself up, and not doing a good job at that either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predators saying, "Come get me!" I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there was literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came out of. Not good. I remember checking to see what car I was getting picked up in, and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon after stepping outside, a black sedan pulls up to the curb, and the driver starts rolling down the window, so I step forward. Before this man even spoke, I could feel something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be prey. He basically barked at me. "I'm your Uber driver." This was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally Uber drivers just roll down the window and say, "Fossil Full 12?" or any version of that, but always including your name. I think I just stared at him for a second, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in, and I ask him, "What's my name?" He immediately is enraged and screaming about how he doesn't have time for this and just to get in the car, etc., etc. I don't think I've ever sobered up so fast in my life, as I'm now completely panicked. Obviously this wasn't my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately see it's not a match. Meanwhile, this guy is still screaming at me, and I have absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or have a weapon. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you, and I don't have the keys, nor the time to unlock it. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well, as he's idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot, and again, I would have to take the time to find the right keys to get in. If I screamed, I'm not exactly in the type of neighbourhood where someone would try to be a vigilante, and I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't hear me. Also, it's 4 a.m. and absolutely no one is around. People talk a lot on this sub about how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring in shock at this screaming man, the results would be the same. From when he'd start screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds had passed by. He's looking like he's getting ready to get out of the car. I then notice another black sedan pulling up right behind him. Checking the license plate as quickly as I can, I realize that's my actual Uber and make a full sprint to the car and throw myself in, screaming at my real Uber driver to tell me what my name is. The poor dude looked terrified but responded with my name quickly, to which I reply, "Get me the hell out of here, that man is trying to kidnap me." If I was in this Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to react as quickly as he did. But my dude flew out of there, offered to call the cops for me, which I declined and now regret, and then walked me to my front door of my apartment, ensuring I got inside safely. Truly an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fattest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. It all happened last summer when me and my childhood best friend, both 15, decided to go camping for her birthday. We were originally supposed to be a group of 5 or 6 people, but it ended up being just the two of us. We met at her grandma's house, me with my scooter and her with her mum in her car, then headed to our camping site for the next 2 nights. The camping site was very deep in the woods and beside a public trail, and there was a neighbour who had a lot right next to the one we were using. My friend's mother warned us not to walk on the left side of the trail, which would lead us to the weird and probably dangerous neighbour's plot. We obviously listened to her advice, since we didn't want any trouble. After unpacking most of our gear, her mother left, leaving us alone in the middle of the woods with only a 50cc scooter to get out in case of an emergency, which, don't get me wrong, was very useful but not very fast. So we started our camping experience, eating junk food, listening to music, catching up on both our lives, as we hadn't talked in a very long while. She'd moved away a few years prior to this, so we didn't get the chance to talk to each other that much. The sun was slowly going down, and it was getting darker and darker. We were talking and singing when we began to hear a noise. It was an ATV that was coming along the trail. But guess what? It was coming from the left side. Remember those crazy neighbours I mentioned earlier? My friend and I freaked out a little, so we just locked the door and ran to the back of the camper. The ATV stopped on our camping site. We could hear 2 male adults talking to each other, about God knows what, but it took something like 5 minutes. They eventually left. At this point we weren't that worried because we'd thought it was just some curious people who wanted to know if there was anyone in the camper, which had already been robbed in the past, so we just continued with what we were doing, listening to music, etc. By this time it was already dark outside and the moon wasn't out yet, leaving us with no other lights other than our candle. There was no water or electricity in the camper, which also meant we had to go outside to use the toilet. Fortunately, it turned out to be a full moon that night, so eventually the moon would come out and we would be able to see outside pretty well. So again we were talking, but everything else was quiet. No music, and surprisingly no animal noises either. And then we heard an ATV coming our way once again. We blew out all our candles and stopped talking. Waiting in silence, we quietly sat on the ground of the camper to make sure no one could see us from outside as the curtains were still open. We listened. The ATV stopped a little before our camping site and everything went silent. A couple of minutes after, we could hear footsteps coming from all around the camper. Someone was walking around our camper van, and yes, it could have been an animal. But with the ATV sound and what happened afterwards, we know it wasn't an animal. The steps eventually faded away, and from this moment on, my time perception went completely out of the window. We then quietly moved to the back of the camper, closing every curtain and making sure the door was locked. We brought every knife, pair of scissors, food, drinks, candles and anything that could be useful into the back of the camper, and we both decided we had to use the inside bathroom, even if there was no water. It was now pretty silent outside, so we eventually carried on with our night. We played games, talked, and we were laughing very loudly when we suddenly heard a noise. We immediately went silent and we hid the candlelight. We then heard the noise again. It was like someone trying to open the camper door just by turning the handle. We heard footsteps again going all the way around the camper, and whoever it was testing every single window to see if any of them were open. Now there's no need at this point to tell you that we were almost crying, since the back of the camper was literally covered in windows, and the bed we were on was exactly the height of the windows. After testing them all to make sure they were locked, the steps once again faded away, leaving us for another 30 minutes, maybe an hour of tranquility and silence, during which we were quite panicked. Once we'd finally calmed down, we heard noises at the door once again, but this time it sounded more like someone trying to pick the lock. They were working away at trying to get in. After 5 or 6 minutes of trying, the person got mad and started angrily turning the handle whilst punching and kicking the door. We were totally freaked out at this point. I had my brand new iPhone in one hand, hesitating on calling the cops. The only service that was available at this location was 911. The noises were still going on at the door and all around the camper. And this lasted for at least 30 minutes or so. And then they were trying every window around us. Eventually they gave up once again, and we were in complete fear, trying to think about every possible scenario. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was one of her family members making a bad joke. We thought it could have been an animal, but then an animal wouldn't have tried to pick the lock. We had to think of a plan. The noise at the door happened a couple more times, but then we'd finally come up with an idea. We used our acting skills to make up a scenario in which we were more than 2 people in the camper. So we started acting like my friend's mother and sister were there too, and as if one of our guy friends was there as well. We acted like the noise woke us up and screamed at the people to go away or we would get mad. It seemed to have worked though, as then we heard multiple people running away. We waited a little and then went to sleep, as we were absolutely exhausted after the night's events. The next morning, after making sure everything was okay, we emerged out of our camper van. We could see that a bunch of the plants out there had been trampled, and there were footsteps everywhere in the mud surrounding the camper. Since it was daytime and my friend's mother was supposed to come back to see us to make sure we were okay, we decided to sit outside waiting for her. Sitting and waiting, we noticed a car slowing down in front of our campsite. It didn't stop, but we could see the driver staring at us. 10 minutes later, it went by again, and again, and again, always giving us a menacing stare. When my friend's mother finally arrived, we asked her if anyone had tried to prank us. She asked everyone possible that we could think of that might do this, but ultimately no, it was not a prank. Everyone she spoke to promised that if it had been them, they would have told us by now. We didn't sleep alone the second night. We had someone else come sleep with us, as we were so scared. This happened about a year ago, and everything was spread out over a couple of months. Now, I'm known for being a very smiley, bubbly, and social girl. At the time this happened, I was the only person who did to-go orders, answered all the phones and customer questions, as well as greeting and cashing out to-go or delivery orders. It was mid-December, and where I live we had a massive Christmas festival and tree lighting, so I was getting multiple phone calls asking if we'd be open, or if we had any specials on, etc. For this one particular call, I answered the phone and reeled off the typical script as an opening to the call. The guy on the other end of the phone was nice, but after I answered his questions about our restaurant, he started asking questions about me, my age, how long I'd worked there, if I was from where the restaurant was located. It felt weird that if he didn't have any more questions about the restaurant, I needed to go. He told me I sounded beautiful and he couldn't wait to meet me. Now this bothered me a little, but time passed and I soon forgot about it. Jump forward a few weeks. The festival has begun and we're really busy. I'm working in all aspects of the restaurant when our bartender comes and grabs me, telling me a man at her table wanted to speak to me. Thinking it was a complaint, I tell her okay and put my best customer service smile on and go over. Hi everyone, I hope everything's okay over here. I heard from our wonderful bartender one of you wanted to speak with me, I said. My God, you're as beautiful as I dreamed you'd be. It's me, the guy you spoke to a few weeks ago. You were so amazing and I just loved you since then. Visibly freaked out, I said, Oh, thank you. Is anything else the matter? I asked. No, I just had to see what my new wife looked like. Oh, well, I've got to go. I hope you all have a great night. I walked away a little nervous, but soon got distracted. The bartender comes over and tells me the guy wants to say goodbye. So I give a smile and wave in his direction, but that wasn't good enough. He comes towards me, arms open, and wants a hug. I awkwardly smile and try to give a distant side hug. Not satisfied with this, he grabs my shoulder, causing me to face forward, and he gives me a really tight and hard hug. At the end of the night, I ignore my uneasy feelings. From my body working as hard as it had been, I end up becoming sick for a couple of days. On returning to work, my manager tells me that John, the guy, has called the restaurant around 56 times and would only want to speak to me. As we're discussing this, the bartender then tells me that someone wants to speak with me on the phone. I make my way over to behind the bar and pick up the phone. "Guess who?" the man on the phone says. It's him, telling me he loved seeing me and couldn't wait for us to get married. I hung up immediately, and my manager and I decided to block the number. I finished my shift, and on walking to my car, I noticed another car parked weirdly in the parking lot. I giggle to myself and ignore it. Then said weird car is now pulling up to me and saying something that I'm really not paying attention to, and I don't hear them. So I get into my car and start replying to text I had received during my shift. I now notice that the same car is now parked right beside me. The window is cracked so I can see that they are facing me, but can't tell much else. The car then started pulling up to each side of my car, the person inside staring at me from each angle for about 5 minutes or so. Then I realize it's him, John. I'm really scared now. I was even too scared to drive off, thinking he would just follow me. The only thing I could think of doing is call my job. After doing so, 4 guys come sprinting out of the back with knives and the car drives off. We don't have cameras in our parking lot, which is really crappy, I know. They calm me down and I drive home watching everything around me. That night my phone started acting extremely weirdly, shutting on and off, and apps opening, even though I hadn't touched them. This had never happened before. I eventually decide to shut my phone off completely, knowing I had another option of calling someone if needs be. The next morning I wake up feeling nervous. I get ready for work and head out to my car. As I'm pulling away, I notice something on the side of my house, so I go up to see, and it's 2 pocket knives. One appeared to have blood on it, and the other was above my head, so I had to step back to look at it. When I did, I noticed the second knife was stabbed into a picture. I can see it's a picture of me at a store, shopping. That was it. I was done. I called the police and they took my statement and did the whole process you have to go through when reporting something like this. There were 2 other scary things that happened during this whole ordeal too. I found pictures taken of me from random times and areas that were thrown all over my deck, and a note that had been left on my car whilst I was at work that said, "Hi pretty, love you." The paper looked like it was soaked in blood, albeit fake. So now the number is blocked. Everyone in my restaurant knows what this man looks like, and I get walked in and out of my job by a male manager or co-worker. I have cameras and weapons everywhere. I hate having to do this, but it's for my protection. Nothing, thankfully, has happened for a while. I just figured others would find this interesting, or maybe it's happening to someone else, and it makes them feel less alone. So I thought I'd share my story since I'm constantly reminded of this event, and I always felt like writing it down. So here goes. Let me give you a little background info to begin with. I had been diagnosed with major depression when I was 18, and have been on and off different medications since then. I've always had suicidal tendencies and have attempted to take my own life twice prior to this event. So the weekend mentioned in the title was Easter 2017. I had gone through a difficult time, not being happy with my job, relationship problems and crippling anxiety. I wasn't on any medication at that time. So on Good Friday, I'd had a little bit too much to drink and suffered a massive nervous breakdown, which resulted in me slitting my wrist with a broken wine glass. It was around 11 p.m. and my boyfriend was in bed, but he quickly realized what was happening and tried to stop me from doing any more harm to myself. If he hadn't have been there, I really might have ended up dead, as the cuts were really deep, and I'd lost quite a lot of blood. He managed to call an ambulance and I was taken to a hospital where my wounds were treated. After that, I was transferred to a psychiatric ward as I was in a right state. Now this is where the actual horror begins. Because of the condition I was in, I was given tranquilizers and I managed to get some rest. But before I was brought to my room though, the doctor in charge told me in a kind of apologetic way that the ward was fully occupied, and since it was Easter no one was going to get discharged, and so they only have one free bed left in a room that I had to share with another difficult lady. Since I've always worked with difficult people, those being people with learning disabilities and aggressive behaviour, I wasn't too happy about this. But I had other thoughts on my mind and just wanted to get some help and some rest and to finally feel better. She took me to my room, and this is where I met my new roommate. I don't want to sound horrible, but she looked like someone straight out of a psycho horror movie. Just the kind of person you'd expect to find in a place like this, a real cliché. She was probably in her late 40s, early 50s, had long, unkempt dark hair, wore a hospital gown and slippers, and she didn't smell too good either. The doctor introduced us and then left me to get some rest. She just mumbled a hello and then left the room. She had just finished breakfast. It was around 10 a.m. by the time I got to bed. I wasn't impressed by her at all, because she didn't seem to care for personal hygiene. But at this point I was so exhausted I didn't care and just wanted to get some rest. So I took my tranquilizers and went to bed, dozed off and slept till the afternoon. When my mum came to visit, visitors aren't supposed to enter the bedrooms, but she brought me some stuff and took it to my room and then we went outside for a bit. She told me that the room smelt horrible, but she was happy that I was safe. At this time I was still very unstable, so when my mum left I was given another dose of tranquilizers to help me get back to sleep. Now since I've already slept most of the day, it took me longer to fall asleep that evening, and it didn't help that my nice roommate was starting to freak out. She would always leave and re-enter the room, and due to only wearing her slippers, it would make this disgusting dragging sound. She then had some kind of psychotic breakdown, and the nurses came to our room to calm her down. After an hour or so, she was quietening, and I was falling asleep. Until 1 a.m., I woke up to see our whole room lit up. Due to being asleep most of the time, I wasn't too aware of the time or my surroundings, but I checked my phone to see it was still the middle of the night. It turns out Lady decided it was time to get up, turn on all the lights and have something to eat. I was really annoyed and asked her to turn off the light as I wanted to sleep, and she just hissed back that she would turn it off when she'd finished her meal. My annoyance grew and I called the nurse to tell her off. The nurse came, told her it was night time and to turn off the lights, and surprisingly she obliged. It took me a little bit longer to get back to sleep because I was really annoyed and I could still hear Lady making noise, but at least it was dark. So the next day, Easter Sunday, it came and went without any remarkable incidents, apart from me getting more and more annoyed of my roommate due to leaving and re-entering the room every 10 minutes and not flushing the toilet or washing her hands afterwards. Night-time came and I was given yet more tranquilizers to quickly fall asleep, not knowing this night was going to be an absolute nightmare. I woke up later at around 2 a.m. It was dark and I was sleepy, but I could feel something on my face. At first I thought it was just my hair or a bug, but then I realized it was a hand touching my face and my hair. I opened my eyes and saw Lady standing next to my bed, her face too close for comfort, touching mine and stroking my hair. I was mortified. I let out a yell and pushed her to the ground. I was hysterically screaming and calling for someone to come. She was just sitting on the ground where she landed after I pushed her, staring at me as if I was the one acting up. The nurse came and Lady told her that I'd pushed her. I was in shock, crying, and told her what had happened. She then asked Lady to follow her and told me to stay where I was, which was where I was supposed to be anyway, and they went. I was shaking and sure I'd never be able to sleep again. But after 15 minutes, the nurse returned and told me I could relocate for the night to a spare room that wasn't usually for patients. I was relieved. I would have slept in a bathtub if that meant I was getting away from that woman. I was given another pill, and after what felt like an age, I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I was told I had to go back to my room, since that spare room wasn't meant for patients. I reluctantly agreed, and when I got back to my room, Lady was walking around again, stopped for a moment to look at me, mumbled sorry, and then left the room. I needed to get out of there, but since it was Easter Monday, they still weren't discharging patients, so I had to endure another night. I was feeling better though, since I had been put back on antidepressants, and although I felt still very weak, I just wanted to go home, fearing staying there would make me lose my mind for good. When evening came, I was really scared of the night ahead, and so luckily the nurses decided I could spend the night in that spare room again, and on the next day I was able to go home. Before I left, I was quite euphoric, so when packing my bag, I actually briefly talked to the lady. Turns out she lives quite close to where I live, and to this day I'm scared of meeting her in my local supermarket or something. I will never forget this Easter weekend for many reasons, and I really hope she is doing better now. This could maybe be nothing, but it seemed really weird at the time. So I was taking a walk around my neighbourhood because I'm living with my parents and I wanted to smoke weed before going to bed and not stink up the house. I figured there'd be no one walking around since we're on lockdown and it's nearly midnight. Even if there was someone walking around, it's unlikely that they'd care that I was smoking weed anyway. About 5 minutes after I'd left my house, I noticed a black pickup truck drive past me. I don't really pay much mind to it because you still occasionally see people driving around at that time of night. I get to the end of the street where he drove past me, and I see him again driving back up the street. I just assumed he'd forgotten something before setting off and was driving back to grab it. I walk for another 5 to 10 minutes, and I see him drive past me again. Now I start to get a bit paranoid at this point because for him to drive past me a third time would mean that he's driving in the complete opposite direction he was originally driving, and because I'm smoking weed while listening to a true crime podcast. I realize that walking around alone at night while smoking weed and listening to podcasts about serial killers is a recipe for paranoia, but I'm usually completely fine. I know my area well, and it's easy to spot anything out of the ordinary. I carried on walking, but I go in a different direction to what someone might expect had they seen me walking that night, just in case he was following me. I'm also not really listening to the podcast anymore, as I'm looking out for this black pickup truck. Then, lo and behold, guess who I see driving past me again? At this point, I'm absolutely shitting myself, because for him to have driven past me again, he would have had to have driven in a very specific way, so I'm almost completely sure he's following me. I then decide to stop walking and just face the truck as it's driving towards me and try and stare him out. This is probably a very stupid idea, as I have no fighting experience and it's not like I'm super strong or anything, but I wanted to make it seem like I wasn't scared of him and was ready to defend myself if he decided to pull over and attack me, despite the fact that I was terrified of him and would probably lose a fight against him anyway. But the weird thing is that he didn't even glance at me. He just looked straight ahead and kept driving. I find this weird for 2 reasons. 1, because there's no possible way that he didn't notice this was his 4th time driving past me. The road and the path I had been walking on were in very close proximity and there was no one else out. And 2, because I literally stopped in my tracks to stare him out. He would have noticed this, as it's not very often that people stop in their tracks just to stare you out. He drives off, and at this point I'm freaked out. So I run to a snicket that someone who doesn't know the area well wouldn't know about, so that he couldn't see me from the road. I call my friend who lives nearby and basically said, "This is going to sound strange, but there's a black truck just driving around our neighbourhood over and over again." My friend tells me he's going to go and check. We're on the phone and he's outside looking down his street for this truck. "Did you see him?" I asked. "Nah," he says. "I can't. Wait a minute." Then he goes silent for a few seconds. "That's him." Forget this, I'm going inside. What the hell? I'm still hiding in this alleyway and still on the phone to my friend after he's gone inside. Luckily my friend has cameras on the outside of his house, so he's watching his monitors as we're chatting. This truck drove past his house another 2 times in the span of about 5 to 7 minutes. We both agreed that this is really weird, so I call the police non-emergency number to report it, and they tell me they'll send a unit down to check it out. I then call my dad to pick me up, and he comes straight away to me. He didn't care about the fact I was out smoking, and that's what makes him an absolute hero. When we arrived home, we called my friend to ask him for any updates on the situation. This black truck drove past his house 15 times in the time it took me to get back home, which took maybe 20 minutes. After the 15th time, he saw a police van driving down the street and didn't see the black truck again after that, so I assume the police found him, but they haven't updated me. I tried to logically figure out an explanation for it all afterwards. I thought maybe he was a pizza delivery man, but that didn't make any sense because he wasn't slowing down to look at the numbers of the houses, and surely after the 20th time of driving around this very small area, you'd just ring the person you're delivering to, or maybe even pull over and ask me since I clearly know the area if I'm walking around it at night. Then I thought maybe he was looking for his dog or something, but that didn't really make sense either, because the area he was driving around was so small. If your dog was lost, you'd cover a much larger area than just this one little area 20 times. Does anyone have any ideas as to what he was doing? This all started when my mum met her new boyfriend, who I'll call Ray, and I was 14 at the time. The first time he met me and my mum, he looked at her and said, "Oh wow, didn't know you had a gang." So great first impression, right? He seemed like a normal guy at first, but after he'd moved in, we soon realized he was a hothead. He would yell a lot and throw tantrums, but then would always sweet talk his way around my mum to make everything seem okay again. This was probably why she didn't dump him sooner. Also, my mum has always been a bit immature, so I think it made it easier for him. What Ray didn't find easy though was getting along with me and my siblings. He would complain about every little thing we did wrong, and he started to accuse us of trying to ruin their relationship because of this. I have 3 sisters, and me and my younger sister were the wild ones of the family, and we were the ones he had a problem with. He soon stopped us from seeing friends he didn't like, and was more strict with us than with any of my other sisters. I realized he was crazy when he picked me up from school one day, which he never did, and whilst driving home, he accused me and my sister of talking about him behind his back. I was totally confused by what he was saying, and he started telling me not to bother denying it because he's got proof. When he got home, he showed us a recorder he'd got and played it back to me and my sister, and we were complaining about him in our bedroom, so I knew that he had planted the recorder in our bedroom. I immediately asked him why he was recording us, which escalated into a big argument. I rang my mum straight away and told her what was going on, but I think she didn't want to get on his bad side, as she didn't say anything about it to him, which still really annoys me. After that, I made him remove all the recorders from mine and my sister's room. Move forward to when I was 16, and I'd got a job at a chicken treat. He had a big problem with that as well, and the reason for this was because my boyfriend at the time worked there too, and he thought I was just going there to mess around. So his way of making sure I wasn't was to come and record me, and he did this for a month. My manager even had to go out to him a few times to tell him he couldn't videotape the restaurant, which was mortifying. But every time my manager would go out to confront him, he just said that he was proud of me and wanted to film me at my job, yada yada. Ray would also purposely walk into my bedroom when I was changing, which really weirded me out. And every time I told him to stop or get out, he would say that we should have locked the door. My sister also told me he did the same thing to her, so we always had to get changed super fast. By this time I was pretty much done, and decided to move in with my dad, who had just moved back from New Zealand. My dad was pissed when I told him all of what had been going on, and he wanted to call the police. But my mum begged him not to, and they broke up soon after, over something unrelated. So I've been reading all these experiences people have been having, and it persuaded me to post my own. I'm male and was 17 years old at the time of this story. I was working at this amusement park in my city at one of the biggest fast food places there. Myself and my co-workers had all just finished a busy shift and decided to hang out together afterwards. And that night I ended up at a co-worker's house. He lived right by my metro station, and at 3 a.m. I decided I was going to head out, walk to the station, and only then remember that they all close around 1:15 a.m. So now I'm in a part of the city I don't know, with no way to get home. But of course it dies while I'm trying to, so I shuffle around in my pockets and find 50 cents to use the payphone to give her a call. I explain the situation to her, where I am, etc., and ask if she can pick me up. She's not happy about it, but she obliges. As I'm sitting on the bench waiting for her, out of the corner of my eye, I see this old man staring at me. He's tall, super slim, and is wearing jeans that are way too loose for his frame. I think nothing of it, even though at the time I should have wondered what he was doing out there so late. While this wasn't a horrible part of the city, it wasn't the best place either. After a couple of minutes, I looked back and he is still staring at me. Only now when he sees me, he starts grabbing himself over his jeans. Now, I'm not freaked out really, just more annoyed because in my head, I can take him if something happens, which in hindsight is really dumb to think, because he could have been armed. I give him a dirty look and he starts to walk off down the block, a building blocking my view of him. I figure it's done, but I can't shake this feeling like he's still around. So I walk up to the curb of the block I'm on and look in the direction that he'd left. I discovered he hadn't gone very far, as he was just standing there, maybe 25 meters from me, and still looking. I go back to sit down on the bench, realizing the situation I'm in now. I go back to check a couple of minutes later, and he's gone. Now I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, so I decide to leave the area. I figured I could walk towards the direction my mum was coming from, and keep an eye out for her on my way. As I continue walking, I see cop cars and a bunch of police investigating a hair salon that had been broken into. This becomes important later. At some point I figured the idea of meeting my mum was dumb, and after 10 minutes of walking, I decided to go back to the metro station. I'm standing on the curb, and suddenly a red van pulls up alongside me, and the windows roll down. It's the same guy. He asks me if I need a lift. Obviously knowing that this is not going to end well if I go into the car, I say no, in no uncertain terms. And as he drives off, I memorize his license plate as fast as I can. I'm shook up, but I remember the police officers at the salon. I walk all the way there, and thankfully they're still there. I explain the situation, but I'm worried they won't take me seriously. But the cop was super nice and took down my statement and the license plate number. He told me to go back to the metro, and once they were done with the salon, they would be there to check on me. Once I get back to the metro, about a block down is the same red van, illegally parked, with the guy clearly just in there waiting for me. I try to look like I don't see him, but at the same time being super vigilant that he doesn't get out of his car. At that same moment, the police pull up. I point out the red van, and the van at that point speeds off. The cops go after him and come back later saying that they went to check his house and he wasn't there. I apologised for messing up and pointing him out, but the cop assured me that I did more than enough, and with a report now they can have an inkling of a case if ever this happens again. My mum pulls up, seeing me talking with cops, and stares at me with daggers in her eyes. So creepy guy at the metro, I hope you weren't a serial killer, and I hope you were just looking for a prostitute and weren't looking to harm me, even though I have a feeling you were. It's really scary to think it could have been that close if I was a little less street smart. I hate knowing that people like that exist. Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and click that notification button so you can be aware of all my videos when they upload. If you have a story that you'd like to hear me record, then please send it to my subreddit, rmissfearsome83, or alternatively email me at missfearsome83@hotmail.com. If you'd also like to support me further, please go to my Patreon and join for as little as $1 a month, where you'll get early access to all my recordings, and they will also be available as MP3 downloads. I also have some awesome merch on the Spreadshirt website. All links are in the description below. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.